And I think there's 50. You can try to count, but I'm pretty sure there's 50. You'll see what I mean. So this video is probably a little weird, but I hope you take it in the spirit that it's intended. This is just supposed to be fun and a way to celebrate 50 years of Dungeons & Dragons. And just a heads up, this video contains the consumption of alcohol. So if that somehow triggers you or bothers you, come back next week for another video. But right now, let's have some fun and let's celebrate 50 years of Dungeons & Dragons. Cheers. So in celebrating 50 years of Dungeons & Dragons, I thought it would be fair to review a lot of the different types of D&D. So first of all, let's start off with the fact that even though we are currently in the 5th edition of D&D, there are way more than 5 editions of Dungeons & Dragons. In fact, we start with original D&D from 1974. And then we go to basic Dungeons & Dragons and advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Technically, 2 different games. Now, the first basic set evolved into what we currently call BXD&D. And then one of the other basic sets evolved into what we now call BECMI Dungeons & Dragons. And both of those existed alongside of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, which we now call First Edition. And then there was Second Edition, Third Edition, and 3.5. Followed by Fourth Edition. And all of those existed before we got to 5th edition. And a lot of those editions are like wine. Some of them have aged really well, some of them not so much. And I'll have to confess that while I really didn't like 4th edition when it first came out, over the years I've recognized that it is a much better game than I gave it credit for originally. It's still not the game I want to play, but I do recognize that 4th edition aged much better than some of the other editions of D&D. 4th edition is, at its core, a solid game. I think I'll just finish this glass for 4th edition. So cheers to all the different editions of Dungeons & Dragons. But before we get too far, let's go ahead and explore a variety of other versions of D&D. So let's start with Pathfinder. Now, Pathfinder is a lot like a good cocktail. There's an artistry to it. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of different combinations. What I'm drinking here is called a Purple People Eater. Has blue curacao, red wine, and a little splash of cranberry in it. Not my kind of thing. But Pathfinder, I think you see what we're going to do here. Pathfinder has a ton of options, and you can customize your character in all sorts of ways. In fact, Pathfinder is a lot like making a good cocktail. There's kind of a artistry to it. But here's to Pathfinder. So next up, we have our rules light versions of D&D, and those are like craft beers, right? So you have games like Karn, Knave, Black Hack, Crown and Skull, Shadowdark, Dungeon Crawl Classics, and Morkborg. Now, I say those are like craft beers because they're easy drinking and there's a wide variety of them. And there's a bunch of different craft beers, just like there's a bunch of different rules light versions of D&D. But like Karn, Knave, and Black Hack they're a lot like this Kolsch, very smooth and easy drinking. Those are games that are very rules light, very straightforward, very simple, very easy to play. But then you have games like Crown and Skull and Shadowdark, right? Those have a little more to them. They're kind of like this malty stout beer. And then you have games like Dungeon Crawl Classics that are probably more like a porch rocker, you know, weird, zesty, different, right? And then you have games like Morkborg. Hang on, I didn't take a sip for Dungeon Crawl Classics, and then I said it again, so hang on. There's 2 for Dungeon Crawl Classics. So, like I said, Morkborg, it has a very unique, straightforward, dark, gritty feel to it. And I would compare that more like flavor-wise to like a double IPA, something that's really got a punch to it, you know? So here, cheers to all the rules light versions of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, as always, you can help out the channel by hitting the like and subscribe button and clicking the notification bell to make sure that you get to see all my latest videos. You can also check out the Wandering Tavern, which is a sponsor of this video. In fact, April is Wandering Tavern month in the Dire Den. It's clearly inspired by Studio Ghibli, filled with fantastic arcana punk flying ships and mysterious dark spirits that contrast the whimsy of this flight and fantasy setting. This expands on the successful Kickstarter they had last year called Sky Zephyrs. It not only includes the setting history, but battle maps, NPCs, plot hooks, magic items, and even setting-themed recipes. Explore this immense flying city with all its battle maps and details. Every nook and cranny delve deep into the devious underbelly of the tavern while getting to know its wide range of unique NPCs, patrons, and staff. The Wandering Tavern's dark mysteries and entangled truths are yours to unlock. Use the link in the description and the pinned comment below, so when you back this Kickstarter, you'll also support the Dire Den. So next up we have our D&D Clones. Now a clone is something that's built, usually it's built off the OGL, but it's designed to replicate older styles of play. So for example, Labyrinth Lord in Basic Fantasy, Osric, the whiskeys have a little more bite than the beers do. Those particular clones are intended to replicate older styles of play. So they're based on basic D&D with splashes of advanced D&D. So they're a little more complex than our rules light versions that we talked about earlier, but they're still pretty smooth and easy to play, much like this bourbon, right? Bourbon whiskeys usually have like vanilla notes or caramel notes, and they're sweeter and they go down smoother than some of your other whiskeys do. And that's what the retro clones, games like Basic Fantasy, Osric, and Labyrinth Lord, they're all like bourbon. Then you have your Scotch whiskeys. Scotch whiskeys, they're more complex, they're earthy, they're peaty. They don't go down quite as smooth as a bourbon does, but they have a potent, unique flavor to them. And I would say that's what Worlds Without Number and Castles and Crusaders are. They're more like a Scotch whiskey. So they have some complexity and some uniqueness to them, much like a good Scotch. Next, we have 13th Age and Old School Essentials. And they're more like a rye whiskey, right? Rye whiskeys have some spice to them. They're a little bolder, but they're not as earthy as, say, the Scotch is. But they're a little more interesting than the bourbon. So rye whiskeys are kind of like 13th Age and Old School Essentials. Now, Old School Essentials, it very much has its own unique flavor to it. While it's very much a retro clone, it replicates basic and advanced D&D. Old School Essentials has a very unique style and a very unique layout to it. So Old School Essentials kind of takes on a life of its own, more so than a regular clone would. And that's why I say Old School Essentials is kind of like a rye whiskey. I think I said it twice. Now, 13th Age, on the other hand, it's built on the 3rd edition OGL, but it is a lot more like 4th edition D&D. So it has its own unique spice to it, again, which puts it, for me, in the rye whiskey category. But here's to our clones of D&D. Cheers, clones. And that brings us to 5th edition, which I would compare 5th edition to a good rum, right? It's sweeter, easier to drink, and I would say more people enjoy rum than they do whiskey, for example. So I would say 5th edition is very much like a good, smooth rum. However, even though 5th edition is the newest version of D&D, we have a few variations, and I would contend that Level Up Advanced 5e is a stronger, more potent version of 5th edition, and I would say Level Up Advanced 5e is more like a dark rum. And while we're in the dark rum category, I would say Tales of the Valiant, which is coming out this year, I think. Tales of the Valiant would also fall into the dark rum category. I said it twice, so I took a big swig there. And while we're talking about rums, I have to say my favorite type of rum is a good spiced rum. And that's what I would compare my home game to, because my home game is 5th edition, spiced up with some cool homebrew rules. Well, I think they're cool because it's my game. And that's the whole point, right? This is about you and your game. Cheers to 50 years of Dungeons & Dragons. So I think you get my point. Like, over the last 50 years, we've had a ton of different games that are all D&D or D&D adjacent. And that's the fun of it all, right? Is you get to play the version of D&D that you like, and you get to enjoy the version of D&D that you enjoy. It's all about you and your friends and Dungeons & Dragons. I know I've said that probably way too many times through the course of this YouTube channel, but that's kind of my heart for Dungeons & Dragons. There is no wrong way to D&D as long as you and your friends at your table are having fun with it. And you don't need to judge anybody else for the fact that they play a different edition than you. They're all great. And it's just like there's no wrong way to imbibe your favorite spirits. I might poke fun at somebody who likes IPAs because I don't. Or I might poke fun at someone who likes cocktails because I don't. Just like I would poke fun at somebody who plays Pathfinder because I think it's unnecessarily complex. But that's just me having fun and being silly. I don't honestly believe that someone who plays Pathfinder is a bad person. Just like I don't believe someone who plays 4th edition is a bad person. But ultimately, it's all D&D, and we've had a great run for 50 years. And that's what we're here for. To enjoy this hobby that we all love in one way or another, even if we don't all enjoy it the exact same way. So, in the comments below, have fun, but don't be harsh. Tell me, celebrate your greatest moments of Dungeons & Dragons and your favorite editions of Dungeons & Dragons. And let's all enjoy another 50 years. Maybe I'll live that long. Fingers crossed. I'll live to be 102. But hopefully, this community will have another 50 years of celebrating Dungeons & Dragons. So I hope that was both fun and informative for you. By the way, if you missed the video that came out earlier this week, I think it's because the algorithm is punishing me. Kind of lost some momentum with taking the week off. So go ahead and watch Tuesday's video too, and that'll help the channel out as well. And thanks again for watching the Dire Den, and I'll see you next time.